Hey everyone, I was looking around on YouTube to see the installation videos for somebody who had installed the K&K Twin Fusion pickup and found a lot of them that were people evaluating them, but not really one for the actual act of installing one and what the pitfalls you might go through. So I thought I'd make this video. I intended to make a video, actual video of me doing it, but obviously I needed my hands to actually install the pickup myself. So instead I just took a bunch of pictures along the way, and I'll sort of give you a tutorial as we go through these pictures. First picture you see here is the picture of the mandolin before I began. That's a small lie. That's actually a picture of the mandolin after I finished, point being that it should and did look the same before and after. The only thing that really changed is the end pin. But for all intents and purposes, that's the picture of the mandolin I was going to be working on before I started. Now obviously the first thing is I undid the strap pin that was currently on the mandolin and then started drilling. Obviously I knew the end pin is going to become the place where I jack in the cord, so I had to drill the hole for that. And I started with a certain size hole and drill bit that I thought was the right size for the end pin to go through, but it turned out to be not a big enough drill bit. So as I got a bigger drill bit for it, I was finding out that I'm going through not only the end block inside the mandolin, the wood block inside the mandolin, but also the end plate on the mandolin, the metal part, had to be enlarged as well. So it was just a matter of getting a bigger bit and a bigger bit and try fitting it until I was able to work on getting the end pin through the end hole in the mandolin. And of course the instructions tell you that you should fish a wire through that end pin and then try to draw the end pin out from the inside of the mandolin through that hole to the outside. And that was a little more frustrating than it needed to be. I would retool the instructions to say that you should drill the hole and then size the hole by pushing the end pin from the outside of the mandolin through that hole, just making sure that you've drilled that hole large enough that that end pin will slide in and out of that hole. Then you can worry about getting it snaked through the inside of the mandolin and pulling it out through that hole, obviously as it should be, and then you'll put threads on it. But that's just sort of the first indicator I had that's a little bit different from what the instructions say. So obviously I ended up using, I think, about a half-inch drill bit to get the size of the end pin threads through that end hole. And of course the whole time I was worried that I'm making a bigger and bigger hole in the mandolin, and that the worry is that you may actually break the mandolin in doing this. So that's a concern that I had, and many of you may have also if you're drilling into your mandolin. Of course I was using a semi-cheap Galveston mandolin. I know Galveston is not a great name, but this was sort of a top-of-the-line Galveston. It's a fine mandolin. It sounds real nice. But all in all, it's not a very expensive mandolin, so I didn't have a whole lot to worry about. But still, no one wants to fear breaking their mandolin, so I had that fear as I was doing this. But we got through that. So we got the end pin where it should be, and then as per the instructions, you tie or fish a wire through the end pin hole and then tie it to the pickup end pin arrangement and then draw it back through that hole. And so that all worked fine. Now that I knew the hole was big enough, that actually worked fine to draw that out through the end. And then they have you to go ahead and leave the wire attached to it and push it back inside the mandolin. That was sort of all just a test that you have to do before you install the transducers, obviously, so that you have the ability to work the hole and the end pin back and forth as you need to get the mechanics of this thing arranged beforehand. From that point on, it's all about attaching the transducers to the underside of the mandolin head, and and they're going to be sitting at the basically at the feet, at either foot end of the bridge. And what you end up doing, and the instructions will tell you, is to sort of look, or if you can look, it's hard to look, but you feel for the tone bars inside the mandolin that are secured to the underside of the top of the mandolin. You have to sort of feel around with your finger in there and feel where the tone bar is, because you're going to be putting these transducers right at the widest part of the F hole, the sort of that point that points right towards the foot of the mandolin. And in my case, one of the tone bars was a little close, but it still had enough width to get the transducer between the F hole and the tone bar, which happened to run right underneath the foot of the mandolin. So my transducer in that case did not go directly under the foot of the bridge, is what I meant to say. I'm at one side, but over on the treble side, the tone bar was a little further away, and I was able to position that transducer a little more towards the actual underside of the bridge, and still have a lot of clearance between it and the tone bar. So the tool they give you is the bent nail, and you put some putty on the bent nail, and you follow the instructions up to a certain point. What I'm really trying to say here is the things that are a little different than the instructions. The instructions are done very well. I'm just pointing out a few things. So with that bent nail, and they give you a little ball of putty that you put on that. So you put it actually on the transducer, in the back of the transducer. You've already put the sticky material on the other side, the gold side of the transducer, and that's what's actually going to adhere to the underside of the mandolin top. So what you're doing with the putty then and the bent nail is you're on the non-sticky side of the mandolin. You're using it as a device, because your hands can't get in there. You're using it as a device to lift that transducer up and press it to the underside of the mandolin top, and hold it there for a minute, just to let that sticky substance secure it to the underside of the bridge, as it were. And then when you go to peel the bent nail and putty away, it does peel away fine from the transducer. What the instructions on the transducer, or for the transducer, tells you is that you would put it on the black label side of the transducer. And what it actually is that the little K&K round label is a sticker that will actually come off with you, and I think is meant to come off with the putty. So as you release the nail, in essence you're securing that putty and the nail to the that sticker, that circular K&K sticker. And when you do go peel the putty and the nail away, that sticker will come with you. So don't be surprised when I first pulled that out and I saw that K&K sticker. So, oh, what have I done? I've torn the transducer off, but the transducer was indeed connected to the underside of the top, and that round K&K sticker was meant to come off with the nail. So then I just repeated that. The same for the treble side of the mandolin F hole. I happen to do the bass side first. Same procedure. Another piece of putty, another stickified transducer. Secure it to the labeled part of the transducer, lift it up and hold it there for a few seconds to get it to secure, and then when you peel the nail and the putty away, the label will come off, I think, as it's meant to. It's not clearly defined that way in the instructions, but that seems to be absolutely the case, and it works just fine. Beyond that, now you're back to the point of pulling the end pin out back through the hole, because you've still got that wire attached to it. And because we've drilled the hole to proper size, that is a pretty easy procedure. The only trick part to that is the instructions tell you to remove the nut in one washer, which is actually the securing nut for the outside of the mandolin. What they don't tell you is that there are two other washers on what's going to be the inside part of the mandolin, the threaded part, and they don't tell you really what to do with those two washers. What I've found is that those two, and I don't know if this is exactly what the instructions intend, but those two certainly serve to be both a flush point where it tells the threaded part where to stop, so it can't come further out through the hole. So I get that, but then also because there are two washers, it allows you a little bit of, I would say, control or flexibility, because what you want to end up with is, as you push that or pull that end pin out through the hole, and there are a certain number of threads showing there, you're going to put that washer and nut back on there and secure them. That holds the end pin in place, and then on top of that you actually screw on top of that arrangement the actual end pin strap holder, I guess you would call it, or just end pin maybe we'll call it. It actually threads on the outside of the end pin jack and becomes a connection point for your strap. The guidance there, as per the instructions, is that you should have the end pin sticking out enough that when you secure the nut on the end pin jack, there should be a couple threads showing. So that adjustment there, making it where a couple threads show, was a matter of removing or adding, or as you need to, that washer, that pair of washers I was talking about. I ended up taking one of those washers off because I didn't have enough threads showing. And so then when I did secure the washer and the nut, I had the proper amount of threads showing, so just by removing that one washer. So I think that was the intent of the procedure, but it was not clearly defined in the instructions, so I wanted to point that out. Beyond that, for the most part, it was exactly following as the instructions say, and they did work, I would say, perfectly. As long as you follow the instructions to the letter, read them through a number of times before you start cutting, drilling, pasting. That's pretty much standard practice in anything you do. Read twice, cut once. So that all worked out fine. I was able to get that secured, and then once I had certainly the transducers attached to the underside of the mandolin top, the end pin jack pulled out through the hole, secured, tightened, and then I screwed the strap point on top of that. Everything worked out well, was the right adjustments, the right number of threads. The indication is if you don't have enough threads showing there, then when you do go in to jack in your instrument cable, it may not connect well, because if there are not enough threads showing, it may not push in enough, or vice versa. If there's too many threads showing, you want to make sure that when you push that instrument cable in there, that it does make a tight connection. And in my case, because I had the right amount of threads, that did work out fine. Beyond that, as I said, it was just follow the instructions to the letter, and certainly it does work absolutely fine. There's plenty of videos on YouTube about how it performs, and I'll agree with all those. I didn't even have to put a preamp or anything on it. It just absolutely picked up just fine. And I actually used it this morning in my first performance with it, and was very pleased. So the intent of this video here was just more about just pointing up some of the things that perhaps couldn't be clearly defined in the instructions as they're given to you. So hopefully this will help somebody else out there, alleviate some fears, and have some confidence, because going into it, I was actually going to get the mandolin, the K&K Twin Fusion, that had an exterior carpenter jack, and then I looked at this and actually read some of the documentation online that K&K had, and it looked like I could do this myself with an interior mandolin using the end pin jack. So I was a little trepidatious, but I did go ahead and go through that, and found that it was as expected, and I was able to do this myself without having to contact a licensed luthier to do it for me. So I'm not going to say you won't have a little fear yourself doing it, or a little nervousness, but it can be done. And I guess the worst part for me was drilling that end pin hole right through the metal of the end pin, the strap hole. I can't think of the name right now, but the end block there. So, like I say, enough drilling and enough sizing up, and it worked just fine. So hopefully, if you all want to try this yourself, I wish you the best, and hopefully with the instructions given and my tips, you should be very successful. All right. Thanks all. Take care.